then Jamal.
Thank you, Shelley. Thank you. And look, Shabbir and Claudia in particular have given a very good context, I think, in terms of how we understand what is happening in the context of US imperialism. I want to add something in terms of just how more narrowly we understand the events of the past few weeks. Firstly, in the context of how they speak to the central question of how we understand the framework of the Palestinian struggle for freedom, justice, and equality. And secondly, how we understand the historic mobilizations that have happened globally in solidarity with that struggle over the past few weeks, in which the UK has been to the fore, certainly in terms of the numbers that have been mobilized in demonstrations, not just the numbers, the huge numbers marching in consecutive weeks in London, but remembering that those demonstrations were matched by more than 80 demonstrations happening in towns and cities across the UK. And finally, just to say something, and in doing that, maybe I can address part of Tony's question. What do Palestinians need from us as we build on the momentum that has been established? Let me just say, first of all, Tariq said, and in many ways he's right, that in some ways we've been here before. There are aspects of the script that has been read out over the past few weeks that we have seen before. Israel launches a major assault upon Gaza. Huge numbers of Palestinians are killed. A ceasefire is eventually called. Israel seeks to portray this situation as one of it responding to rocket fire from a terrorist enclave, that it's exercising its right of self-defense. The reaction of the international community, certainly of international governments, largely follows that script. Criticism of Israel is framed within questions of proportionality, of excessive use of force, and the demand during the bombardment becomes, how do we restore calm? How do we end the violence? And we have seen previously, particularly in 2009 and 2014, huge mobilizations of people in solidarity with the Palestinians in response to those assaults. So many of the components are the same, but there are some different factors that we should not lose sight of. Firstly, the scale of the protests was significantly larger here in the UK than anything that we have seen before. Historic numbers marching in support of the Palestinian people. Secondly, in the case of these mobilizations, they occurred not just in the context of a major assault on Gaza, but as others have said, as a reaction to what was happening preceding that assault in Sheikh Jarrah. So an ongoing process of ethnic cleansing that was culminating in court cases to try to legalize the forced expulsion from their homes of families who had lived in them for decades, that led to significant grassroots mobilizations on the ground in East Jerusalem that got brutally repressed by Israeli forces, including assaults on those praying at Al-Aqsa. And then that was what led to Hamas's response and Israel's assault upon Gaza. But the final additional component was a unification of protests by Palestinians that had not been seen for decades. Those resisting in Sheikh Jarrah and in Gaza being joined by Palestinian citizens in Israel, who were then subject to brutal attacks, lynchings in towns and cities across Israel. Now, all of this is deeply destabilizing and concerning to Israel and to its allies. What sustains Western support for Israel, or seeks to rationalize and justify it, is a narrative that frames Israel as a liberal democracy engaged at worst in a temporary occupation that only endures because Israel does not have the ability to hand over any territory, because what is required, we are told, is some form of territorial compromise, does not have the ability to hand over any territory to any entity that it could trust to establish a peaceful and stable state. All of that, of course, is manifestly untrue. And what people were witnessing and reacting to over the past few weeks is what I described in one of the speeches I gave at a recent demonstration as the naked, raw, brutal, unvarnished face of the system of power that Israel has established over Palestinians, system built upon a regime of institutionalized discrimination that meets the definition of apartheid. Apartheid visited on Palestinians in Gaza in the form of a brutal siege on Palestinians in East Jerusalem and the West Bank through the rubric of military occupation that continues to colonize their land, ethnically cleanse them from their homes, deny their freedom of movement, and if they protest, takes them and their children into military custody, where they are most likely to be subjected to torture. Apartheid visited upon Palestinian citizens of Israel through bodies of law and policy that discriminates against them in terms of their rights to own property, to settle, determines where they can reside, and together creates an overarching body of law that establishes them as second-class citizens. And finally, apartheid visited upon the bulk of Palestinians, those who live outside of the territories, the descendants of those expelled from their homes in 1948, denied the right to return, whilst simultaneously the right to settle and become citizens is granted to any Jew anywhere in the world, regardless of any established generational connection to the land. So the uprisings in Palestine as well, we need to remember, came in the context of attempts by Israel, supported by Trump, to effectively eliminate the Palestinian cause entirely through the establishment of the Abraham Accords and the other components we saw of Trump's so-called deal of the century, removing the right to a capital in Jerusalem, trying to redefine the status of refugee, so it was removed from the descendants of those expelled, and therefore taking the right of return entirely off the table. It also came, these uprisings came in the context of brutal repression on the ground over many years of human rights defenders. And as others have spoken about, it came in the context of a global attempt to suppress the solidarity movement by defining advocacy for Palestine, and in particular support for boycott, divestment and sanctions as inherently anti-Semitic. And we all know that that has been an extremely successful campaign that has created a chilling effect on advocacy for Palestine. So what we have seen in the past few weeks is a revival of popular grassroots resistance on the ground in Palestine, but also a refusal by the solidarity movement, an uprising, a refusal to be silenced in the face of attempts to delegitimize it. And this is manifest not just in the numbers of people mobilized, but in the demographics of those protesting. As Shelley said at the start of this meeting, what was noticeable were the numbers of young people, but what was also noticeable were the numbers of demonstrations happening in school grounds across the UK. So let me conclude by coming to this. What are the key tasks for us as we respond to this moment? Firstly, to mainstream and foreground the narrative of oppression that Palestinian civil society has maintained for decades, but is now being picked up and mainstreamed by the human rights establishment, that of apartheid. And secondly, to listen to the clear message that Palestinians give to us when they ask us to show solidarity. And that message is stark and is clear. When we ask Palestinians, what is it you want us to do? The answer they give is simple: end your complicity. End the complicity of our governments through its political, diplomatic, military and financial support with Israel, including an end to all trade that supports apartheid, including the arms trade. End the complicity of our public bodies, the universities that invest in complicit companies, the pension companies that also invest millions of pounds in companies supporting Israel's system of apartheid, and end the complicity of those corporations and companies themselves by directly targeting them. So we have to keep up the momentum, directly answering the question of what do we do next. Shabbir has already talked about a demonstration that's taking place on June the 12th. We need to mobilize for that. On June the 26th, we will be organizing a Palestine block as part of the People's Assembly March. And tomorrow, PSC is announcing 3 days of action in July with 3 focuses, all under the slogan, take action, end apartheid, support BDS. July the 9th is the 16th anniversary of the launch of the Palestinian call for BDS. So on the 8th of March, So on the 8th of July, we're going to be organising a lobby of Parliament, calling for sanctions and an end to the arms trade. On July the 9th, there will be a mobilisation amongst students, a student day of action, calling for an end to the complicity in terms of universities' investments. And on July the 10th, we're calling for a day of action, a national day of action to support BDS campaigns. Our task, our responsibility is to commit ourselves to stand in solidarity with the Palestinians, never to stop protesting, never to stop lobbying, never to stop marching, never to stop boycotting until they enjoy what is their birthright: freedom, justice and equality in their historic homeland.
Thank you so much, Ben.